My name is Celeste Marin. And the night I finally stopped being someone else's safety net, I was sitting alone at table 17, wearing a dress the color of slate, watching my brother's wedding reception glow like a chandelier I had hung myself while my name appeared nowhere in the program. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how a woman becomes infrastructure. It started the way it always did, with a phone call at the wrong hour and a voice that knew exactly how soft to go. I was at my kitchen counter on a Thursday evening in late April, working through a procurement audit on my laptop, the hum of the city 16 floors below me, when my phone lit up. My mother's name, Dollars. I stared at it for one full second before I answered, because there's a version of yourself that already knows what's coming before a word is spoken. Dollars never called to check in. She called to cash in. "Sweetheart," she said, and I could already hear the cashmere in her voice, that particular softness she reserves for the moment before the ask. She said she and Dad had been talking, that it would mean so much to everyone if I could pitch in for a few of the wedding details. Just small things. Nothing significant. I said yes before she finished the sentence. I always did. She closed with the line she'd been perfecting for 15 years. "I honestly don't know what this family would do without you, Cel." I stayed on the line a few seconds after she hung up, staring at my reflection in the dark window of my apartment. The cursor blinked on my laptop screen like it was waiting to see what I'd do next. What I did next was wire the florist deposit by Friday morning. Within 10 days, I had become the de facto financial engine of my brother Elliot's wedding to a woman named Priya, without ever being introduced to a single vendor as his sister. The wedding planner, a hyper-efficient woman named Steph from a firm called Blanc & Gold Events, had my number listed as the billing contact. Her emails arrived addressed to Celeste, event finance lead. Not the sister, not even the donor, the finance lead. Like I was a line item that had been assigned a personality. The invoices came in waves: $1,200 for the stationery suite, $4,000 for the ceremony florals, a deposit for the catering company, followed by a revised deposit when Priya's mother upgraded the menu. I paid them the way you pay utility bills, mechanically, quietly, without ceremony. No one called to say thank you. Steph always ended her emails with "per Dollar's approval" and copied my mother on the confirmations, but never me, as though I were a processing system that didn't need to be informed of its own outputs. The first time I noticed it, I told myself it was an oversight. The fourth time, I stopped explaining it away. I started a folder on my desktop. I named it simply The Record. Receipts, wire confirmations, email threads, screenshots of invoices with my name nowhere near the top. Not because I planned to do anything with them, just because the truth has a way of dissolving in families like mine, and I needed somewhere it could survive. It was a Tuesday when I met Priya for coffee, 6 weeks before the wedding, under the pretense of coordinating a few vendor questions she had forwarded through Dollars. She arrived 20 minutes late in a cloud of dry shampoo and cheerfulness, apologized for nothing specific, and within 4 minutes began discussing the fairy light installation she wanted above the main reception tables. It would run about $9,000, she said. The original lighting package was already covered. This was just an add-on. She slid her phone across the table so I could see the mood board. I looked at it. I nodded. I did not yet know that I was already listed in the internal event documents as Celeste M. primary sponsor, prefers to remain uncredited. I found out later. I always find out later. Dollars had written it into the planning notes herself. Steph had flagged it in a thread I was BCC'd on by accident, a thread in which my mother had explained to the lighting coordinator that I was more comfortable behind the scenes and that my name should be kept off the public-facing materials. I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to the record, filed under a subfolder I labeled "Their Words, Not Mine." What Dollars had actually done was give me a role without asking me if I wanted it, and then stripped my name from it without telling me it was gone. The seating chart arrived via text message 3 weeks before the wedding. Dollars sent it as a photo, the table layout rendered in delicate script on blush cardstock, and I zoomed in immediately the way you do when you already expect to find something wrong. I was at table 16, in the corner, wedged between the videographer's assistant and someone labeled Priya's college roommate's spouse TBD. No designation. No title. Not Elliot's sister. Not the woman who paid for the chairs everyone is sitting in. Just Celeste, floating on the edge of the room like a footnote that accidentally made the final cut. The invitation had arrived 2 weeks earlier, postmarked from a bulk printing service, no RSVP card inside. When I mentioned it to Dolers, she said they'd assumed I'd be helping with logistics anyway, that my seat was more of a courtesy, that the invitation was symbolic. I turned the word over in my head for days. Symbolic. Like a thank you card with no stamp. Like a birthday call that comes the morning after and opens with, "I thought you were traveling." I went online and looked up the venue's floor plan. Table 16 was adjacent to the service corridor and approximately 12 feet from the emergency exit. A location designed for people you want available but not visible. I bought a dress that weekend. Charcoal silk, structured shoulders, tasteful. The kind of dress that says, "I'm here, but I didn't ask to be." I tried it on in my hallway mirror and stood very still for a moment, and the thought that floated up was so quiet and so precise that it almost didn't hurt. I had dressed to be elegant in my own erasure. The lunch with Dolers happened on a Wednesday. Neutral territory, a brasserie on the north side of the city, the kind of place where the lighting is soft enough to hide discomfort. She arrived in a belted linen blazer and oversized sunglasses she didn't remove until she sat down. We talked for 20 minutes about the weather and the caterer's new menu additions before I said it plainly. I'd seen the seating arrangement and the program draft. I wanted to understand if it was intentional. She didn't hesitate. She said I was overthinking it. She said I'd never liked being in the spotlight. I told her I hadn't asked for spotlight, I'd asked not to be invisible. She sipped her water slowly, set the glass down with precision, and told me not to make this about ego. She said Elliot had a lot on his plate. She said Priya was doing her best. Then she waved one hand in the air, as though she were shooing away a small, inconvenient thought, and said, "Not everything has to be fair, Celeste. That's just how it is." I looked at her across the table for a long moment. "That's the most honest thing you've said to me in years," I told her. She smiled like I'd agreed with her and flagged the waiter for dessert. And then, just as I was pulling my bag from the back of my chair, she leaned slightly forward with the casual precision of someone who has weaponized warmth for decades and said, "Besides, you're not married, no children, but you're wonderful for a check. Honestly, that's more useful than any speech." She said it lightly. She said it like it was a compliment. The waiter arrived. She ordered creme brulee. I stood up, smoothed my jacket, and walked out of the restaurant without looking back. Outside, the afternoon light hit the sidewalk hard and indifferent, and I stood in it for a moment, just breathing. That sentence. She's not married. She's good for a check. She'd said it like I wasn't there. Like she was narrating me to a room I hadn't walked into yet. I didn't know at the time that she would say it again. At a microphone, in front of everyone. 2 weeks before the wedding, I opened my email to find a thread forwarded from the planning team sent to me by mistake, the way all the most important things in my life have arrived. It was a chain between Dolers, Steph, and someone from the event production crew. In it, my mother had written, "Let's keep Celeste out of the formal acknowledgments. She's more of a behind-the-scenes contributor and prefers it that way." It wasn't phrased as a request. It was phrased as a fact about a person she had invented to suit herself. I sat with that email for a long time. Then I called my attorney, a woman named Iris who had handled my business trust for 3 years, and whose particular gift was the ability to deliver devastating legal news in the same tone you'd use to discuss weather patterns. I told her I needed to understand what authority I held over the event trust, a financial instrument I had set up specifically to manage family contributions after the second time Dolers had redirected money I'd given Elliot towards something he hadn't asked for. Iris told me the trust was entirely under my control. She asked if I wanted to freeze discretionary disbursements. I told her yes. She said once we filed it, there was no easy reversal. I said that was the goal. I hung up the phone and stood at my kitchen window for a while, watching the city move below me, and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not anger. Something quieter than that. Like the first full breath after a very long sentence. The morning of the wedding arrived gray and warm, the sky uncertain about what kind of day it wanted to be. I drove to Harlow Hall, a converted estate venue 40 minutes north of the city, in the late afternoon, parked beneath a row of oaks, and sat in the car for exactly 3 minutes before getting out. The grounds were already alive with the organized chaos of final preparations. The string quartet was running a sound check near the ceremony arbor. Catering staff moved in efficient lines across the grass. A woman in a headset who I'd never met asked if I was the event director. I told her no and kept walking. I found my seat at table 16, set my bag down, and stood just inside the tent long enough to take in the room I had paid for. The fairy lights canopy was spectacular warm gold threads of light layered above the reception floor, exactly as Priya had described on her mood board. The florals were lush and precise. The centerpieces were everything I had approved in writing 3 months ago. The whole room looked like a dream that someone else had taken credit for, because they had. I got a glass of wine. I stood near the back. No one approached me, not Elliot, not Priya, not Dolers, who I spotted across the room holding court near the champagne station in a structured burgundy gown, laughing at something someone said, her posture the particular kind of loose that only comes from feeling entirely secure. I watched her and thought, she doesn't believe tonight will cost her anything. She has no idea what's already happened. The ceremony was beautiful. I will say that honestly. Priya came down the aisle in a dress that moved like water, and Elliot watched her the way you watch something you can't quite believe is real. Their vows were personal and sincere. I clapped when everyone clapped. I did not cry. Not because I felt nothing, but because I had been saving my feelings for something more productive. The toasts began after dinner. Dolers took the microphone first. She spoke about love and legacy, about the gift of family, about the beauty of this new chapter. She was good at this, the language of sentiment without the weight of sincerity. The crowd was warm and willing. And then, at the precise moment when the room was softest and most receptive, she glanced in my direction with a smile that had been sharpened over decades of practice, and she said it. The thing she'd said at that brasserie on a Wednesday afternoon. The thing she apparently believed was true enough to say again in a room full of people. She said, not everyone finds their person. Some of us, she paused for the laugh she knew was coming, are still single, no children, too busy for all of that, but she's always good for a check. Laughter moved through the room in waves. Elliot laughed. Priya looked down at her plate but kept smiling. Someone at a nearby table actually applauded. An aunt near the back shifted uncomfortably in her seat, but she said nothing. No one said anything. Dolers handed the microphone to the DJ like she'd just delivered a benediction. I sat very still for approximately 4 seconds. Then I stood up. I didn't rush. I didn't scrape my chair. I walked calmly toward the DJ booth with the particular steadiness of someone who has already made the decision and is simply executing it. A few guests noticed. Most kept drinking. The DJ looked startled when I held out my hand for the microphone, but he gave it to me, and the room tilted into a sudden silence that spread the way silence does when everyone senses something is about to happen that cannot be taken back. I held the microphone in both hands and looked out at the room without focusing on anyone in particular. I said, "She's right, I'm not married, I don't have children." I let that sit for a moment. "And yes, I do write the checks." A few people tensed. Someone near the front set down their glass. Then I said, evenly and without raising my voice, "As of today, the $94,000 that made this evening possible, the florals, the lighting, the catering, the venue, all of it is frozen." A glass broke somewhere to my left. The room went completely still. I handed the microphone back to the DJ, turned, and walked out of the tent. The night air outside was cooler than I expected. I stood on the gravel path and breathed in slowly, not because I needed to steady myself, but because I needed to confirm that I was still standing. My phone buzzed immediately. It was Iris. "The venue just called," she said. "Do you want me to speak on your behalf?" I typed back, "Already handled." Then I put the phone in my bag and kept walking toward the parking lot. I was almost to my car when someone touched my elbow from behind. Elliot. He was slightly out of breath, jacket open, face doing something complicated. He said, "Celeste, wait, you don't understand." I turned around and looked at him in the dim parking lot light, and I said very quietly, "No, Elliot, you don't." The hotel room I'd booked for that night was clean and impersonal and blessedly silent. I sat on the edge of the bed at 12, 9:47 a.m. and scrolled through 29 missed messages without reading most of them. Dolers had left a voicemail, her voice brittle in the way of someone trying to sound composed while being neither. She said I had embarrassed everyone, including myself. Elliot's message was 3 words: "I hope you're happy." No one said they were sorry. In families like mine, the people who were wrong are almost never the ones who apologize. I poured a glass of water from the tap and stood at the window looking at the parking lot below and felt, very distinctly, the absence of weight. Not happiness, exactly. Something more precise than that. Clarity. The particular clarity that arrives only after you stop carrying something you were never supposed to pick up in the first place. Iris called the following morning with methodical calm. The trust freeze was official and documented. The breach of contract notice had been formally issued, with Dolers and Elliot as named parties. The venue had redirected their outstanding balance inquiry to Priya's family. Iris said, "It's amazing how quickly the narrative shifts when the bills are no longer being absorbed." I laughed once short, dry, real. "Call me when anything else surfaces," I told her. 3 days later, something else surfaced. Iris had discovered a duplicate contract that Dolers had attempted to push through a notary. She knew personally a document that would have transferred a property I co-owned through the family trust to Elliot and Priya, listed as a wedding gift. Iris had already filed a preventive block. I listened to her explain it with a calm that surprised even me, because by that point I was no longer surprised by what Dolers believed she could quietly take. I said, "It was never about the property, Iris. It was about who she assumed I wouldn't fight." Iris said, "She assumed wrong." I said, "Yes, she did." The days that followed had a strange texture to them, busy and clean, like the air after rain. I sent formal communications to every vendor, thanking them for their professionalism and clarifying that my financial involvement in the event had concluded. All future inquiries were to be directed to the families of the bride and groom. I attached a signed statement and hit send on all of them in one sitting. Power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just signs its name and walks out. A cousin sent me a video clip without comment. It was shaky footage from the catering tent, the audio slightly muffled, and on it I could hear Dolers' voice, casual and buoyant, telling 2 vendors that Celeste was just their walking direct deposit, reliable as a payroll system. One vendor laughed. The other said, "Every family's got one." I watched it twice. I saved it. I said nothing publicly and did nothing dramatic because I no longer needed to. Elliot came to my door 6 days after the wedding. He looked the way people look when the version of their life they'd been rehearsing turns out to be a different story entirely. He said Priya had asked for space. He said she'd told him the wedding had never really felt like theirs, that Dolers had consumed it, that he'd let her. He stood in my doorway and said, "We didn't think you'd actually leave. You've always been the one who stayed." I looked at him and said, without anger, maybe because no one else ever learned how. He didn't have anything to put after that. He left. I closed the door gently, and for the first time in a very long time, the silence in my apartment felt like mine. I posted something on LinkedIn at 9:17 on a Tuesday morning. I didn't use names. I didn't have to. I wrote about what it means to be the reliable one, the fixer, the quiet financier, the person everyone calls dependable while systematically ensuring she has no seat at the table she paid for. I wrote about the particular loneliness of being seen as a resource rather than a person. I wrote that when you never ask for anything, people begin to believe you don't feel anything. I wrote that I had spent years confusing generosity with belonging, and that those are not the same thing at all. By mid-afternoon, it had been shared 300 times. By the following morning, it was circulating in finance and logistics circles, forwarded quietly by people who recognized themselves in it. Strangers wrote to me, women who had held entire family structures together with their own income and received nothing for it but the expectation to continue. Men who had played the same role and had no language for why it had broken them. I read every message. I responded to none of them, because what they needed wasn't my reply. They needed to hear their own story told back to them so they could finally name it. 2 weeks later, I stood on a stage in front of 400 people at a leadership summit and spoke about invisible labor, about the economics of silence, about what happens when the person who built the bridge is never allowed to cross it. I wore black not out of mourning, but out of precision. I spoke for 22 minutes and did not use notes. My final line was this: I used to think giving meant I mattered. Now I give to things that give back. The audience stood before I had finished setting down the microphone. Dollars sent me a message 2 weeks after that. No greeting, no warmth, just, "We'll handle things on our end, I hope you find peace." It sat in my inbox unopened for most of a day. When I finally read it, I felt nothing particularly sharp, just a strange lightness, the kind that arrives when you realize the thing that used to hurt you has simply run out of reach. There was no apology inside it. There was only distance disguised as a closing statement. I didn't reply. Elliot's message came later that same night, longer than I expected. He said he didn't know what we had become, but he didn't think it was supposed to go this way. He said I had always been stronger than the rest of them. He said that like it was a consolation. I read the message twice. Highlighted one line, the one about strength, and deleted the rest. Being stronger than someone is not the same as being loved by them. I had learned to stop mistaking the first for the second. On a Friday morning in early autumn, I drove north out of the city past the familiar exits, past the turnpike ramps I had taken hundreds of times toward obligations that were never really mine to carry. I kept driving until the road widened and the trees thickened, and I reached a parcel of land I had closed on 3 weeks earlier, a few quiet acres at the edge of a town called Greer's Mill. Good drainage, a natural tree line, a small stream you could hear but not see from the access road. I parked on the grass and got out and stood there in the October light. The plan I'd been building in my head for months was simple: a retreat space. Not a spa, not a wellness brand, just a place. Somewhere women who had been carrying too much for too long could put it down for a while, without being asked to explain why they were tired. No acknowledgement ceremonies, no gratitude displays, just rooms and quiet and the radical normalcy of being allowed to simply exist. I slipped off my shoes and stood barefoot in the damp soil and felt the realness of it under my feet. They took my name off the program, I said out loud, to no one and to everyone. So I built my own. Somewhere behind me, my phone was in my bag, and in my bag was a silver USB drive the size of a thumb, labeled in black marker. Memory, not leverage. Somewhere in the city, the people who had written me into the margins of their story were still writing. They would not be writing me. I had started a different document, entirely one with my name at the top, in full, spelled correctly on the first line, where it had always belonged.